There is a version of this story where everything went according to plan, where four men walked away clean, split the money, and disappeared into ordinary lives. Wives, houses, mornings without looking over their shoulder. That is not this story. This is the story of what really happened, of how a job that was planned down to the minute still managed to fall apart, not because of the police, not because of bad luck, but because of the one thing no amount of planning can account for: the men themselves. Vincent Caro was born in 1941 in South Baltimore, the second of four children. His father worked the docks. His mother cleaned offices downtown 3 nights a week. They were not poor by the standards of the street. But Vincent knew from the age of 7 what it felt like to want something and understand, without anyone having to say it, that it was not for people like him. He was quiet as a boy, observant. His teachers wrote the same word on his report cards every year: watchful. He watched the way people carried themselves, the way men with money moved through a room differently, slower, like the room was already theirs. Vincent filed all of it away. By 16, he was working weekends at a garage on Chesapeake Avenue. By 18, he had figured out that the garage owner was moving stolen parts through the back. And rather than report it or quit, Vincent made a simple calculation and asked for a cut. That was Vincent. Not greedy, not reckless, precise. He did not want everything. He just wanted exactly what he felt he was owed. By the time he was 42, Vincent Caro had spent 20 years moving in the spaces between legal and not. He had never been convicted of anything serious. He had never carried a weapon. He had never raised his voice in a professional setting. He was, by any reasonable measure, invisible. And invisible, he had decided long ago, was the most valuable thing a man could be. Danny Marsh grew up in Trenton, New Jersey, and he had 2 loves from the time he was old enough to have them: cars, and his younger sister Marie. Marie had been sick since she was 4, a heart condition the doctors had a long name for, and their parents had a shorter way of understanding it: expensive. Danny had worked every job that would take him through high school: grocery stock boy, night security, whatever came. He sent most of it home. Marie died in the winter of 1971. Danny was 24. He had not been home in time. He had been 3 states away driving a truck that was not licensed for interstate routes, carrying goods he did not ask questions about for a man he did not know well enough to trust, but needed badly enough to work for. After the funeral, something settled in Danny that had never shifted since. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter than that. A kind of acceptance that the world ran on a logic that had nothing to do with what people deserved, and that the only reasonable response was to get very good at moving through it without being caught. He could drive anything. That was the truth of Danny Marsh that everyone in 3 states eventually came to know. Give him a vehicle and a route, and he would get you there. And more importantly, get you away. He had never once been in a chase he did not finish first. Eddie Saul had done 7 years in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary for armed robbery. He had gone in at 26 and come out at 33 with a bad knee, a strong understanding of the weaknesses of financial institution security, and one absolute conviction: he would never go back. Not because prison had reformed him, but because he had done the mathematics, and the mathematics said that the next time they would give him 20. And 20 years was not something Eddie Saul intended to give anyone. The man called Brick, his given name was Raymond Tull, though almost no one living still called him that, was the hardest of the 4 to explain. He was not cruel. He was not erratic. He was simply the kind of man who existed at a temperature most people never reached, and who had learned somewhere along the way that this made him useful in certain situations and terrifying in others. He had grown up in rural Georgia, the son of a preacher who believed in consequences. He had come north at 19 and never gone back. He asked very few questions, charged a fair price, and never did anything twice the same way. These were the four men, and in the autumn of 1983, Vincent Caro had a plan that needed all of them. They met for the first time as a group on a Tuesday evening in October. A motel room outside of Newark that Vincent had paid for in cash under a name that did not exist. Vincent had spent 8 months building the plan. He had done it the way he did everything, methodically, quietly, without anyone knowing he was doing it. He had made friends with a cargo handler at Newark Liberty, attended public seminars on freight logistics, taken long walks through the industrial terminal at odd hours with a camera that looked like a tourist's and notes that were not. The target was a bonded freight warehouse on the south end of the terminal. Every Thursday night, between 2 and 4 in the morning, it held more cash in transit than most banks. International currency shipments, pre-sorted and sealed for morning transfers. The window was small. The guards were 2. The cameras had a gap, 47 seconds, on a rotation schedule that never varied. Nobody asked if it could be done. They asked how much. And Vincent told them. There was a silence in the room after he said the number. Not doubt, just the particular stillness of men absorbing a fact that changes the shape of everything after it. They were in. They moved on a Thursday, November the 3rd, 1983. The temperature had dropped to just above freezing, and there was a thin fog off the bay that suited them perfectly. Danny parked the car at 1:48 in the morning. Vincent, Eddie, and Brick were inside the perimeter fence by 2:03, moving along the wall in the shadow between 2 light pools. Vincent had walked this exact path in his mind 400 times. His heart rate, he would say later, was perfectly normal. He had found over the years that he was simply not afraid of the things most people were afraid of. What frightened Vincent Caro was waste, imprecision, the wrong word in the wrong room. The inside of the warehouse was cold. It smelled of jet fuel and cardboard. Brick located the guard station in under 90 seconds, exactly where Vincent's contact had said it would be. Both guards were at their post, one asleep, one watching a small television with the volume low. What happened next took 11 minutes. It was not violent. Eddie had a talent, refined over years, for making people understand their situation in a way that produced compliance rather than resistance. Both guards were secured, unharmed, in a supply closet. Both would tell police afterward that they had not felt threatened, a fact that confused the investigators considerably. The cash was exactly where it was supposed to be. 4 sealed freight containers, marked with customs designations Vincent had memorized 6 months earlier, loaded into 8 duffel bags, moved to the south exit in relay. By 2:31 in the morning, all 4 men were back in the car. The entire operation had taken 28 minutes. They had a 47-minute head start before the next guard rotation. Danny pulled out of the industrial district at exactly the speed limit. He did not turn on the radio. No one spoke. The fog had thickened. The city slid past the windows like something half-remembered. For 28 minutes, it had been perfect. Before we get to what happened next, if this is the kind of story you like to wind down with, consider subscribing. New stories arrive every week, and it costs you nothing but a moment. And if there is a story you would like to hear, a real event, a forgotten chapter of history, drop it in the comments. This channel runs on those suggestions. Now, back to 1983. The split was supposed to happen that Friday morning, a rented garage in Pennsylvania. The money counted and divided. Clean, simple, everyone goes home. But something had changed in the 12 hours since the warehouse. Vincent felt it before he could name it. It lived in the way Eddie answered questions a half-second late, in the way Brick had stopped making eye contact entirely. It was Danny who told him. 6 in the morning, the motel parking lot, standing in the cold with his breath misting in the air. Eddie and Brick had talked through the night. They wanted to renegotiate the split. Their position was simple. They had taken the greater physical risk inside the building. They wanted 60% between them, rather than the even four-way cut Vincent had proposed. Vincent listened to this without expression. He had planned for many contingencies. He had not planned for this one. Not because he had not thought of it, but because he had believed that men who agreed to terms kept them. This, he would reflect later, was the closest thing he had to a naivety. He had three options. He could agree, he could refuse and walk away from his share entirely, or he could remind Eddie and Brick that there was a fourth party in this arrangement who knew things about both of them that they would prefer remain private. This was not a threat. It was, as Vincent would put it, an accounting of facts. The meeting lasted 4 minutes. The split remained even. But something had broken. Quietly, the way ice cracks before it gives. A sound you hear and file away, and only later understand was the beginning of the end. The split was supposed to happen that Friday morning, a rented garage in Pennsylvania. The money counted and divided. Clean, simple, everyone goes home. But something had changed in the 12 hours since the warehouse. Vincent felt it before he could name it. It lived in the way Eddie answered questions a half-second late, in the way Brick had stopped making eye contact entirely. It was Danny who told him. 6 in the morning, the motel parking lot, standing in the cold with his breath misting in the air. Eddie and Brick had talked through the night. They wanted to renegotiate the split. Their position was simple. They had taken the greater physical risk inside the building. They wanted 60% between them, rather than the even four-way cut Vincent had proposed. Vincent listened to this without expression. He had planned for many contingencies. He had not planned for this one. Not because he had not thought of it, but because he had believed that men who agreed to terms kept them. This, he would reflect later, was the closest thing he had to a naivety. He had three options. He could agree, he could refuse and walk away from his share entirely, or he could remind Eddie and Brick that there was a fourth party in this arrangement who knew things about both of them that they would prefer remain private. This was not a threat. It was, as Vincent would put it, an accounting of facts. The meeting lasted 4 minutes. The split remained even. But something had broken, quietly, the way ice cracks before it gives. A sound you hear and file away, and only later understand was the beginning of the end. There is something about these stories, the ones where everything almost works, that stays with you. Not because the men were good, not because what they did was right, but because of the planning, the patience, the long years of small decisions that built toward one enormous moment. And because in the end, it was not the police or the cameras or the guards that undid them. It was the oldest thing. Men who thought they trusted each other, discovering at the worst possible moment that trust is not a fact. It is a bet. Vincent Caro understood that. He had simply placed his bet on the wrong men. Or maybe, and this is the version I keep coming back to, he had placed it on himself. On his own ability to see things clearly enough, early enough, to walk away intact. And on that particular morning in a parking lot in Pennsylvania, standing in the cold with his plans quietly shifting, maybe that was exactly what he did. That was the last job. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your evening here. Subscribe if you would like more stories like this one, new ones every week, and drop a comment with the kind of story you want next. A forgotten decade, a cold case, a chapter of history that did not make the textbooks. This channel belongs to the people who listen. Sleep well.